Hello there. Thank you for tuning in to the Leadership Signal, the podcast for voice actors, creative professionals, and other smallish businesses. I'm your host, Rob Sogomonian. You may have noticed we've already rebranded the podcast. We've gone from Lead With Your Voice, which is an existing podcast, to the Leadership Signal. Now, as is obvious from the introduction there is already a podcast called Lead With Your Voice, which is what my choice for the title of this podcast was originally. And I didn't just willy-nilly come up with a title and run with it. I actually did do some research. I looked up the domain. I looked up on several different podcasting platforms, Lead With Your Voice, to see if I could find another podcast with that title. And the day that I did that, nothing came up. So I don't know what was going on with the indexing system or service or whatever. I didn't see anything. And I did some pretty extensive looking into it. The website domain that I went to, I tried to register leadwithyourvoice.com, and it didn't, I mean, it was registered, but it didn't go anywhere. It's just a parking spot. I did some other Google searching for Lead With Your Voice, didn't really find anything. So I went and registered leadwithyourvoicepodcast.com, because I'm not going to go and spend, $3,000 to buy the other domain from whoever owns it. And I'm guessing that that's what Regina Larco, who runs the actual Lead With Your Voice podcast, also decided. Now, she has her podcast hosted, and she's got information about it on her own website, reginalarco.com. I highly recommend you go and take a look at it. Check it out. It's a really fun podcast. She does a great job of explaining how to go about starting a podcast. And it's all about leading with your voice in the podcast sense. Most of these podcasts are just kind of voice-based, where it's us talking to an audience, or if you're doing interviews or, book reports or, kind of whatever you're doing on your podcast, you have to lead with your voice and you have to kind of lead with yourself and your personality. So really good podcast. I've listened to a couple of episodes. Highly recommend you go and check her out. I have decided to kind of rebrand this podcast, which is a little bit more general. Like it's for voice actors. It's for creative professionals and smallish businesses, but it's kind of a general leadership podcast, not really focused on any one segment of voice. It's kind of everything. It's more about leadership and less about your voice. But in targeting voice actors, I was thinking, what are some of the things that voice actors do? We have signal to noise ratios. We have, if you're doing radio work, you have to tune into a radio station. And so the leadership signal kind of seemed like a good generic-ish term to kind of go with. And so that's kind of what I decided on. This week's podcast, unfortunately, is just going to be a short little explanation podcast about that, and just kind of the importance of, hey, if you go and make a decision, pursue an endeavor, and then realize that, maybe in my case, I picked a name that was already pretty well established. I think she started hers back in 2020. So, she's been going for 5 years, at least. And, that's my mistake, 100%. But being able to, number one, admit it, acknowledge it, not compete with it. She's already established that name, that title, just kind of rolling with a change. What direction can I go? And I'm not going to lie. It's not like I just was like, oh, that's taken. All right, great. I'm just going to use this one. It took me like probably a day to go through and really kind of decide what I wanted to call the new podcast. Did it still align with kind of the mission of what I want the podcast to be focusing on, which is just leadership in general for small businesses, like 1 to, 10 people, specific to voice actors, specific to creative professionals, because those are our businesses, right? Like it's just me in my voiceover business. I've run other businesses where I've had, 10, 15, 30 people kind of reporting to me. And a lot of the leadership fundamentals and the basics and the foundation is the same. similar, very similar. But really kind of focusing on directing it to solopreneurs, directing it to people who are one-man or one-woman shows, or one-person shows, and going from there, right? Like that's kind of what I'm trying to do in this podcast. So the importance of, hey, you know what? I chose a direction. It didn't work out. Great. Time to pivot. You know, I'm not happy about it. I really like Lead With Your Voice. I think that's a great name. I'm not surprised, really. I was actually a little surprised that it hadn't already been registered when I was initially kind of looking for it. So I don't know what went on there. Again, I'm pretty good at doing search and pretty good at finding stuff when I'm really looking for it, and it just didn't show up. So, but yeah, it's coming to terms with, hey, you know what? That already exists, or that's already in progress, or, you know, I should probably try to do something else, maybe a little bit more unique, coming up with a different name. And, you know, I used a couple of different avenues to come up with a name. I used, I'm not a fan of AI, but it is really great for brainstorming. So I went to ChatGPT and just said, hey, what are some synonyms with, you know, for a podcast titled Lead With Your Voice? And it gave me a couple of good ideas, a couple of that I had already kind of thought of myself, previously having used ChatGPT to come up with some other synonyms, some other ones. I'm trying to think what they were off the top of my head. Maybe I'll just pull it up really quick and see if it'll remember. I think it was sound leadership was one of them, just because sound and leadership. But I don't really like I don't like the sound of that. It just seems a little bit too, I don't know, cliche. Also, it is used in different context in another podcast, so kind of already taken. So, yeah, I just kind of came up with a couple of ideas. I like the idea of, you know, saying, you know, thanks for tuning in to the signal. I'm hoping that this becomes kind of a, you know, obviously everybody wants their project to succeed. I'm hoping this becomes a mainstay podcast for voice actors, creative professionals, small business owners, solopreneurs. I really want to bring value with that. So really, that's all this episode is. You know, number one, I guess number two, saying, you know, sorry, Regina, if you happened to notice that I created a podcast named the same thing as yours, don't worry, I caught it too. After I posted it, and then all of a sudden 2 started showing up, and I was like, what is this? But yeah, you know, moving on from that, going to the leadership signal, I am going to do I'm going to re-record the first episode of the 0th episode, the intro episode, and put a little kind of disclaimer at the beginning, probably change the closing of that one, pointing to the new websites and stuff like that. The only thing that is going to take a little bit longer to update is I'm using Acast as my podcast platform, if you will, and they have their own website for the podcasts that you kind of set up with them. And I'm not going to be able to update that for another couple of weeks. So the domain is still going to be acast.com/lead with your voice, which is fine. All of the titles on the episodes are going to be the leadership signal. But as soon as I can change that, I'll change it. I've already changed it in the podcast apps. So you may notice that the title of the podcast, if you've subscribed, has changed over to the leadership signal already. I've changed the graphics and all of that. I think I got it everywhere I needed to get it. If any of you notice that it is not changed somewhere, please send me an email. I would just send it to rob@robsogovo.com. That is my voiceover email address. And next week, we will be back with an episode that talks about kind of who I am and my history in leadership, which starts back in 95, 96. I've been kind of doing leadership things, and I'm actually hoping that by going through my history, I can show you or what do you call it? Reveal to you that you probably have too. You probably have been doing a lot of leadership stuff and just not thinking of it as leadership. We're going to start with, when I started the Signier Complex, which was Bungie fan site back in the day for Bungie software. Was drawing a webcomic to kind of tell a really fun sci-fi, semi-realistic story of our involvement in the Bungie community and with Bungie software. We were, I don't want to say friends, but we were acquainted with a lot of the people who were kind of original Bungie employees. We would throw a party every E3. They would come to that and kind of hang out with us and the people that came to these parties. And then, further on, I started working as a freelance website developer for Wide Load Games, which was a studio founded by Alex Seropian, one of the Bungie co-founders. So we're going to go through some of that stuff and kind of how some of the stuff I did back then has led to some of the stuff that I'm doing now, and why I think that, I have any qualification to have a leadership podcast on the internet. Obviously, anybody with a microphone and sometimes a webcam can put together a podcast. So I want to go through kind of who I am, where I come from, and a little bit about my history and my leadership journey. It's probably going to be a longer episode because I'm going to get into some detail about some of that stuff, but it's not going to be too long. But it will hopefully establish me as somebody who is credible, for the stuff that I'm talking about and where I found my information. And then, we're going to move forward from there. So, short episode this week. I don't have a time on my little recording. Oh, there it is. 11 minutes. So just a kind of short intro episode here to just kind of, again, say I'm sorry to Regina Larco for accidentally stepping on your podcast name. But that's all been changed, so there shouldn't be any hiccups there. And for the record, she hasn't reached out to me and gotten upset, so she probably doesn't even know I exist yet, which is fine. However, if at some point she starts listening to this podcast, I do want her to know, hey, you know what? If you did notice that all of a sudden 2 leadership or Lead With Your Voice podcasts were showing up, that was unintentional. So, and then just kind of give you a little update about that and just kind of demonstrate, hey, you know what? When you make a mistake, it's not a bad thing to just say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. And this is what I'm going to do to fix it, right? Don't dwell on it. Don't point blame. Don't say, oh, it was their job, or just, hey, you know what? Yep, happened. Oops, sorry. In this case, didn't cause any harm to anybody. I noticed it immediately and fixed the issue. And don't be afraid to do that. And don't be afraid to, fess up to it too. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. So that's going to be this week's episode of The Leadership Signal, the podcast for voice actors, creative entrepreneurs, and smallish businesses. And hopefully you'll join me on the next one, next Monday. We'll be diving into, again, a little bit about my history before we really start kind of getting started with what leadership is. We talked a little bit about that in the 0th episode, but getting into, I'm going to say, I guess we're going to get started with some leadership principles. So we're going to start talking about your big why, like why are you doing what you're doing, and how do you use that to move yourself forward. Some people call it a mission, vision, values, beliefs, MVVBP. Some people just call it a mission statement. But it's really the why of the business as opposed to the why of you. What are you doing with your business and why is it important? And so we're going to be diving into that. A lot of really cool stuff coming up. Hopefully you'll join me again next week. And as far as this week, thanks for tuning in to the Leadership Signal. Tune in and amplify your voice. I'm Rob Sogomonian, and I'll see you next week. Bye.